From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Sweeney Gray. Anti-corruption campaigners in Colombia have been dealt a blow after Sunday's referendum. Results from the highly anticipated ballot will have to be nullified because not enough people took part. We have the details in this report.
Starting at 8 a.m., over 11,000 polling stations opened so that Colombians could vote in the anti-corruption referendum. Surprisingly, President Iván Duque didn't join the opening as many presidents have historically done.
We came to fulfill our democratic duty. This is a very important day. We have chosen to reject corruption. As Colombians, we must unite in this fight. This fight is not about political parties. It's about standing united.
While President Iván Duque asked Colombians to take to the polls, opposition Senator Gustavo Petro has criticized Duque's empty words.
He's not interested in voting, but saying this would make him look bad. As president, he should have convened all mayors and organized campaigns in every municipality to make sure the people were informed before going to the polls.
For many, this referendum was an opportunity for Colombia to overthrow the corrupt political class. Opposition movements have made a decision to continue their fight, even if the referendum didn't work in their favor. They say they will fight in Congress to put an end to corruption.
We will not give up. We will continue to work on strengthening the judicial system. We will work on reforms to eliminate preferential voting and to educate people.
This is the second time Colombians have come together to take part in a referendum. Unfortunately, this time the referendum was marked by absenteeism.
And to discuss the result from Colombia's referendum in greater detail, we're going to be joined live in Bogota by Juan Gabriel Gomez. He's a political analyst working at the National University of Colombia. Juan Gabriel, thank you so much for joining us. Tell me, any surprises with yesterday's referendum?
I don't think so. It was very easy to forecast that this initiative was going to face enormous obstacles to go ahead. It depends on how we see things. The typical half empty or half full. Many people were disappointed because the threshold to get this referendum approved was not reached. Yet, on the other hand, this electoral result shows that there's a critical mass of citizens that are really upset with corrupt politicians and are going to become a political force in the years to come.
Now, Juan Gabriel, you're saying that there's a critical mass of persons who are not very upset by corruption, but the voter turnout was low. Why was the voter turnout so low?
Because of contextual and historical factors. We can begin with mentioning the fact that this year, in 2018, we have had, including this referendum, 4 electoral events, electoral elections. The first one was for Congress in March. The second one was the first round of the presidential election, and the third one was the presidential runoff. So this is the fourth. There is a sort of electoral fatigue. There is a historic reason that is very important, is that in Colombia we have had a very pronounced rates of electoral abstention. There is very low turnout. Colombia is one of the countries that have the lowest electoral turnout in the world. Many Latin American countries have implemented rules making voting mandatory. Colombia has never done that. But there is a third reason that the political machinery was completely empty the referendum, and many people in
Juan Gabriel, really quickly, I wanted to ask, because we were talking about yesterday's referendum and it's so important, what would have happened if it did pass? How significant would it have been for Colombia?
The scope of the measures proposed by the ones who promoted the referendum is, in my opinion, very limited. Yet it serves the purpose of emboldening the citizenship against corrupt politicians. There are many things that belong to the political regime that are going to, that even if these measures were approved, that will remain unchanged. The transactions that take place between the executive and Congress take place in the same environment in which many transactions take place in other parts of the world. Corruption is endemic to institutions that are based on political competition through elections. That's my.
And really quickly, what's the next step for the senators who are trying to pass this anti-corruption legislation? What can they do next?
Many petitions in Congress are going to become an obstacle to implement all the measures approved by all the measures included in the referendum, not approved. So we need from the promoters to set an example, to adopt, to internalize the rules that they proposed in the referendum. This example can upset the balance in favor of clientelism and corruption in Colombia. So at the moment, it's up to them to show with their example that these changes can be made. Otherwise, this initiative may lose.
Thank you so much for your insight into yesterday's referendum in Colombia. We've been speaking to Juan Gabriel Gomez of the National University of Colombia. Other news now, Mexico and the United States have reached common ground in the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. The accord has come after 13 months of negotiations. A final deal will need a sign-off from Canada, the third country in the treaty. Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto has said that he called Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to add Canada to the agreement. He also had a telephone conversation with the U.S. President Donald Trump.
This is something that's very special for our manufacturers and for our farmers from both countries, for all of the people that work for jobs. It's also great trade, and it makes it a much more fair bill, and we are very, very excited about it.
22 kidnapped migrants have been rescued in Mexico. Among the victims were migrants from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Ecuador. Human traffickers kept them in a house in the southern state of Chiapas. One of the victims was able to escape and call the authorities. During the rescue operation, security forces also seized 400 kilograms of cocaine. Meanwhile, relatives of the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa have come together to call for justice. The students have been missing for 4 years. Relatives have already met with representatives of the incoming government to demand answers. The new cabinet promises to address the case. And still in Mexico, 7 fuel smugglers have been killed by the military. The confrontation occurred near the city of Puebla. Clashes erupted between the gang and patrolling soldiers when the army caught them stealing red-handed from a tanker truck. Venezuela's government is preparing to sell small bars of gold to the public as part of a plan to stimulate savings. President Maduro says within a few days up to 2.5 grams of gold will be on offer in the local currency. He showed off 2 cards with the small gold pieces. The Central Bank of Venezuela has been buying the precious metal from small-scale miners in Guyana. President Maduro explained why he wants the middle class to invest.
To all Venezuelans, you can save with gold. Gold is gold, my friend. Time goes by and the gold is there, and the gold is for the people. The second gold bar, little gold bar I call it because it's nice, is 2.5 grams of gold, which I'm going to place at a cost of 6,300 bolivars, so that you can save in gold and you have your gold bar.
Members of the ruling United Socialist Party are meeting to work on proposals to strengthen the government ahead of its National Congress in September.
PSUV members showed their support for Venezuela's new economic plan. It's the workers who are pushing for this agenda.
We will soon start to see the results of these new measures, but it's up to us to help the recovery process. It can't be just the president or the economic team. This issue involves mayors, governors, representatives, assembly members. It involves the whole party.
During the Congress, social issues were high on the agenda. However, the economic restructuring plan is the party's hope for the future.
As senior citizens, we must support the only government that has supported us. They guarantee our rights and protect us like never before.
Young people are also showing support.
We call on everyone who has left the country to return. President Maduro has started a recovery plan that will improve our situation. All of you who left looking for greener pastures, let me tell you that the grass will be greenest in Venezuela. The economic recovery plan will return purchasing power to the people. Our Bolivarian nation will thrive once again.
During the 4th Congress of the PSUV, Chavistas have created a solid plan of action that will help lead to economic independence.
And during his closing speech at the party's Congress, President Nicolas Maduro announced that young public prosecutors will help to safeguard the fixed pricing agreement and prevent the smuggling of fuel.
I've ordered that through the Chamba Juvenil program, 8,000 young people be trained as public prosecutors to protect the fixed price system and the new hydrocarbons protection program. They will serve as my eyes, ears, and hands all across the country. I will not leave anything to chance. We will do things right and put an end to the theft of fuel that those pests in Colombia continue to use to hurt our nation. They've stolen over $10 billion worth of fuel. We cannot allow this anymore. The theft of our fuel, of our currency, of our resources.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez will arrive to Chile on Monday. It is the first stop of his tour of Latin America that will also take him to Bolivia, Colombia, and Costa Rica. Sanchez is expected to strengthen ties with the region, especially in the areas of education, health, and migration. We'll take a short break now. We'll have more news in a minute.
Infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice. The American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide. Deep into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies. Through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Teachers in Mexico City have shut down the Ministry of Public Education building. They are protesting against the education reforms brought in by the government 5 years ago.
According to teachers, the education model that was imposed on the country simply reduced hirings and never fully addressed the actual issues that have hurt education in Mexico.
We will fight until business owners are removed from the education system, until schools are once again free and secular.
Teachers have continued to mobilize, demanding the repeal of constitutional amendments that have hurt the education system, but also to demand the liberation of their jailed colleagues and the reinstatement of 500 fired teachers who took part in mobilizations.
We've been making the same demands for decades. We want teachers to be an integral part of the nation's development, for an education to be treated as the basis of the development of our people.
La educación ha dejado de ser la parte fundamental del desarrollo de los pueblos. Va a caer, la reforma va a caer.
Despite protests, outgoing President Enrique Peña Nieto says he is satisfied by these changes to the Constitution.
Más de 200,000 maestros obtuvieron plazas y promociones por evaluación.
On the other hand, President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador has promised to cancel the education reform and to call for a referendum to create a new plan that would include teachers, parents, experts, and students themselves.
People in El Salvador have rejected U.S. criticism after the country established diplomatic relations with China. Social movements describe Washington's comments as absurd, especially because the U.S. has maintained relations with China for over 4 decades. El Salvador will benefit from trade and investment agreements with China. People have marched in Nicaragua both in support for and against President Daniel Ortega. They marched side by side in the cities of Managua and Granada. Those who back Ortega are calling for peace after months of political unrest. Opposition supporters want the president to call an early election or step down. Meanwhile, protesters have marched in Costa Rica's capital, San Jose, in support of Nicaraguans who have moved there amidst increasing violence in their country. Last week, people tried to attack a group of Nicaraguan migrants who had gathered in a park in San Jose. The demonstrators marched from that same place to the city center, where they sang and held signs condemning xenophobia. Another Mapuche leader has been arrested in Argentina. The arrest came just after the Supreme Court ruled against him and confirmed his extradition. But his lawyer has said the case was plagued with irregularities. Trinidad and Tobago's energy minister has shed more light about a deal struck with Venezuela on Saturday. Franklin Can explained that even though Venezuela has the 5th largest gas reserves in the world, it doesn't export a lot of it. Trinidad and Tobago, however, is a major gas exporter. The deal will allow Trinidad to process and export gas from the Dragon gas field, which straddles both countries' maritime border. The Central American Parliament Summit has started in the Dominican Republic, which aims to improve education policy. Dominican Minister of Education Andres Navarro is leading the meeting. Authorities will also debate gender equality and the role of political parties and tourism in the region. The Central American Parliament is a regional assembly for Central American countries and the Dominican Republic. Guatemala's Disaster Prevention Institute is warning of mudslides in the areas surrounding the Fuego volcano. Heavy rains have been battering the area around the volcano. Mudslides are expected to affect mainly the areas of Las Lajas and Jute. Authorities are asking people living nearby to take the necessary precautions. The Fuego volcano erupted nearly 3 months ago, leaving 159 dead and causing major damage in the surrounding areas. Archaeologists have uncovered a mask in Mexico believed to represent one of the most important Mayan leaders. The mask has been found inside the ruins of Palenque. Experts say it may represent the 7th century ruler Pakal the Great. He became king at just 12 years old, and he then ruled the Mayan civilization for 68 years. Ceramic figures, carved bones, and other ritual objects have also been discovered nearby. And over 200 bartenders in Havana have mixed the world's biggest Cuba Libre cocktail. The bartenders used over 20 bottles of the world-famous Havana Club rum, 200 liters of soda, and enormous quantities of ice and lemon. A video of the event will be sent to the Guinness World Records, hoping for confirmation of an official world record. The Cuba Libre is considered one of the world's contemporary classic cocktails by the International Bartending Association. What a competition. Let's take another short break. We have world news when we return.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives. Saturdays, only on Telesur. With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. Former Vatican diplomat Archbishop Carlo Maria Vahano has called on Pope Francis to resign. He alleges that the Pope was aware of the sexual misconduct of a former U.S. cardinal 5 years before accepting his resignation. Pope Francis has refused to comment on allegations that he covered up reports of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. Our correspondent Pablo Navarrete has the details.
Pope Francis's trip to Ireland has been met with mass demonstrations against clerical abuse scandals that have taken place in Ireland. Pope Francis gave a mass on Sunday in front of hundreds of thousands and gave a speech where he addressed the abuse carried out by the Catholic Church personnel in Ireland and asked for an apology on behalf of the Church. However, he offered no practical solutions to address what had happened. His visit is the first to Ireland since 1979, and the reaction has been very different to that time when Pope John Paul II arrived, who was treated effectively like a rock star. Now, the abuse scandal in Ireland is one of various abuse scandals that have mired the Catholic Church around the world in countries like Chile, Australia, and the United States. So the reaction this time in Ireland is much more muted to the Pope's visit, and people are angry at the scandals that have engulfed the Church. The openly gay Prime Minister of Ireland on Saturday gave a speech and urged the Pope to use his office and influence to deliver justice and to the victims and to the families and to the relatives, those who have suffered the abuse by the Catholic Church in Ireland.
Thanks, Pablo, for that report, and let's take a look at some more news from around the world.
Germany has condemned violence and xenophobia after a spate of far-right protests. On Sunday, hundreds marched in the town of Chemnitz, a protest organised by anti-Islamic group Pegida. Police were deployed to contain riots. A second day of protests is expected. Women were out in force to hold a national day of action against the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the US Supreme Court. The nomination of Kavanaugh has caused controversy among liberals. They argue his appointment will reinforce the hardline attitude of the Republicans when it comes to women's rights and immigration.
Make no mistake, the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court is a threat to our rights and our future. For decades, Republicans have made no secret of their attitude towards women, working people, immigrants, the environment, the LGBT community. Now they've found their nominee who will make all their destructive, discriminatory dreams come true.
A Russian opposition activist has appeared in court for the second time for breaching peace through protests. Alexei Navalny called on his supporters to demonstrate against a planned pension reform in September. He denies the charges and alleges that the government had approved of his protest.
Spanish police have arrested a prime suspect in connection with the murder of a Dutch schoolboy 20 years ago. Nicky Versh Tapper was 11 years old at the time of his disappearance while on a school trip in 1998. His body was found in a forest. The former scout master, Jos Bresch, was identified as the main suspect after Dutch police launched a major DNA harvesting operation. The arrest follows a public appeal where photos of the suspect were circulated. Spanish police are now in the process of extraditing him. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Suni Gray. Thank you for watching.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses.